camera doesn't editorialize. It doesn't assign meaning or draw conclusions or decide what matters. It simply runs, frame by frame, recording whatever falls within its field of view, indifferent to the weight of what it captures. On the morning of Monday, August 13th, 2018, a residential security camera mounted on a home in the Saratoga Trail neighborhood of Frederick, Colorado, did exactly what it was built to do. It recorded. The footage it produced, time-stamped, slightly grainy in the way of suburban surveillance systems, lit by the flat pale gray of a pre-dawn August morning, would later become one of the most scrutinized pieces of video evidence in a murder case that stopped the country. But at 5:17 in the morning, it was just a camera doing its job, and what it captured was a man loading things into his truck. The man was Christopher Lee Watts, 33 years old, 5 feet 8 inches tall, an employee of Anadarko Petroleum, where he operated oil and gas equipment at remote well sites on the flat eastern Colorado plains, outside the town of Rogan, roughly 40 miles northeast of Frederick. He had lived at the house on Saratoga Trail for about 2 years, together with his wife Shanann and their 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste. The house was brown and tanned, 2 stories, completely unremarkable. The kind of home that blends into a row of similar homes on either side of it the way a single word blends into a sentence. The neighbors on Saratoga Trail knew him as quiet, pleasant, and easy to overlook. He waved from the driveway. He exchanged small talk about the weather, or the Colorado climate, or the kids playing in the yard. He was the kind of neighbor you could share a fence line with for 2 years and still struggle to describe in specific terms if someone asked you about him. On the morning the camera recorded him, he loaded items into his truck. He made multiple trips between the house and the vehicle. His movements were deliberate and unhurried. He did not look around at the surrounding homes. He did not appear agitated or distressed. He appeared to be a man preparing for his workday, moving through the familiar motions of it, doing what had to be done before the long drive east to the oil field sites. The footage runs. The truck leaves. That is what the record shows, what the record would eventually reveal, unfolding across the following 36 hours through police body cameras, news cameras, polygraph transcripts, interrogation recordings, GPS data, phone records, text message histories, real estate agent statements, and a confession that was offered in 2 separate versions, one false, one partially true, was something else entirely. The story of what had actually happened inside 2825 Saratoga Trail, in the hours before that camera recorded Christopher Watts loading his truck, would emerge piece by piece, each new artifact closing the distance between what he was presenting to the world and what he had done. It is a story told by records rather than by the man himself, because the man himself told different versions of it at different times. And most of those versions were false. The cameras and the transcripts and the documents hold the true account. They held it from the beginning, before anyone knew to look. Shanann Rusacek was born on January 10th, 1984, in Aberdeen, North Carolina. Aberdeen is a small town in the Sandhills region of the state, the kind of place where people know each other's families and where you carry the context of your upbringing with you into adulthood. Shanann grew up in the Arzusek family home, alongside her parents Frank and Sandy, and her younger brother Frankie. The family was close in the durable and specific way of families that have built genuine relationships rather than simply sharing an address. Frank Rusacek was present and involved in the way that fathers who are actually interested in their children are present and involved. Showing up, knowing what was going on, being a person his daughter could count on. Sandy Rusek was the kind of mother who knew her children in their specific details, who paid attention not just to the broad outlines of their lives, but to the texture of their personalities, who stayed close even when they grew up and moved away. Frankie was close to his sister in the way that siblings are close when they are genuinely friends and not just family, when the connection is chosen as well as assigned. Shanann from childhood was, by the accounts of everyone who knew her, someone who filled a room, not loudly or imposingly, but in the specific way of a person who brings genuine attention and genuine interest to whatever she does. She noticed people. She remembered details about them. She was warm in the direct and unperformed way of a person for whom warmth is not a social strategy, but simply a way of being. She talked, and she connected, and she made people feel seen, and that quality, that specific attentiveness to other people, stayed with her throughout her life and showed up in everything she did. In her friendships, and her parenting, and her professional work, and her presence on social media. You knew where you stood with her. She did not manage her expressions or soften her opinions into something more diplomatically comfortable. That directness was not always easy to be around, but it was always honest. And the people who loved her loved that quality specifically. Her adult life had included serious medical difficulty. In her mid-20s, Shanann was diagnosed with lupus, a chronic autoimmune disease in which the immune system, functioning incorrectly, turns against the body's own tissue and produces inflammation that could affect virtually any organ system. Lupus is particularly unpredictable. It cycles through periods of relative remission and periods of flare with a pattern that is difficult to forecast and that varies considerably from person to person. The joint pain, the fatigue, the skin involvement, the potential for kidney or cardiovascular damage, the range of what lupus can do to a person is wide, and its unpredictability is one of the most challenging aspects of living with it. For Shanann, at various points in her 20s, the disease had been serious enough to affect her functioning substantially and to represent a real ongoing threat to her health and her quality of life. She responded to it the way she responded to most challenges. She worked the problem. She changed her diet significantly, moving away from foods that seemed to trigger inflammation and toward an approach she developed through research and experience. She became attentive to her body in the specific way that people with serious chronic illness have to become attentive, learning to recognize the early signals of a flare, learning what exacerbated her symptoms and what helped contain them, developing the kind of body literacy that comes from having to pay close attention to what your own body is doing across a long period of time. She worked with her doctors. She was not passive about the condition. She managed it. Over time, through that management, she achieved a remission that was substantial enough to allow her to live the energetic, demanding, fully engaged life she had before. She was proud of having come through it. She incorporated the story of her illness and her recovery into her professional identity in a way that was genuine rather than constructed, because it was genuine. She had been sick. The remission was real. The energy and vitality she brought to her work and her family came partly from the specific quality of gratitude that belongs to people who have felt the alternative and are glad not to be there anymore. She met Christopher Watts in 2010. The introduction came through a mutual acquaintance in North Carolina. He was 25 years old, working in the automotive sector, quiet and contained in a way that contrasted immediately and strikingly with Shanann's energy and expressiveness. In the standard framing of such pairings, they were opposites. She was forward and vivid and quick in conversation, filling silences, moving from topic to topic, generating the momentum of a social interaction through her own initiative. He was still and watchful in a way that some people read as depth and others as absence, difficult to read because there was not a great deal on the surface to read. Both of them would describe the early attraction in terms that leaned into that contrast as a quality of fit. She energized him. He steadied her. In the first years, that framing appeared to hold. They married in November of 2012. They moved around in the years that followed, chasing his career through the energy sector. Chris had shifted from automotive work into the oil and gas industry, where the expansion of natural gas extraction through hydraulic fracturing had created a substantial demand for equipment operators willing to work in remote locations and early morning schedules. The work suited him in some ways, solitary, practical, requiring mechanical competence and the willingness to drive out alone to infrastructure in flat open country. By 2016, Anadarko Petroleum had offered him a position in Colorado, operating equipment at well sites in the Wattenberg gas field region, northeast of Denver. The position paid well and was stable, and they settled in Frederick, which sat within reasonable driving distance of the sites he would be responsible for. By the time they moved into the house on Saratoga Trail in Frederick, they had 2 daughters. Bella Marie Watts was born December 17, 2013, in North Carolina. Susie Celeste Catherine Watts was born July 17, 2015. The girls were 18 months apart, close enough in age that they had never known life without each other, growing up as each other's constant companion and the shared center of the family's daily life. Bella was, in the substantial photographic and video record Shanann built of the family, expressive and assertive, a firstborn who had been the singular focus of her parents' attention for over a year before her sister arrived, and who had the social confidence that comes from that. Susie was warmer on the surface, quicker to seek physical contact and reassurance, openly affectionate in a way that was visible even on small screens. Both girls were young enough that their characters were still forming, still acquiring the details of who they were going to become over the years ahead of them. Both girls showed up constantly in the documentation Shanann produced of their lives. The documentation was extensive. Shanann had been an active Facebook user since the platform became a primary social medium, and she used it the way people of her generation used it, at its best, not for performance, but for actual presence, for keeping in touch, for sharing her days with the people she cared about. When she began working for Thrive, the direct sales nutritional supplements company she had been introduced to, partly through the health management world she had inhabited since her lupus diagnosis, the social media presence evolved into something that was simultaneously personal and professional. Thrive operated on a direct sales model in which promoters were encouraged to share their personal stories of transformation and health improvement as the primary marketing mechanism. For Shanann, this was genuine rather than constructed, because the products had been part of her actual health management, and because she believed in them, in the straightforward way of a person who thinks something helped them and wants to tell other people about it. She built a downline network of promoters beneath her, earned commissions on their sales as well as her own, and cultivated a social media following that watched her videos not because they were produced to a professional standard, but because she was genuinely herself in them. She was funny. She was unguarded. She talked to the camera like she was talking to a friend sitting across a kitchen table, and that quality of real presence converted into real commercial results in a way that calculated performance rarely does. She worked hard at the business and was proud of what she had built. The combination of her personal health story and her genuine personality made her effective in a business that relies almost entirely on authentic personal endorsement. The social media presence Shanann built through the Thrive work became, by 2018, a detailed ongoing documentary record of the life she was living. The birthday parties were on Facebook. The first days of school were on Facebook. The ordinary Tuesday afternoons, the dinners, the playground trips, the girls being funny or tired or sweet, the domestic texture of a family in motion, all of it was documented and shared, creating a running archive of the Watts family's daily existence that was far more detailed than most people leave behind. On the surface, by 2018, the picture of the Watts family that this documentation created was convincing. A busy, warm, photogenic young family in a comfortable Colorado suburb, a mother who was passionate about her work and her children, and who shared both generously, a father who worked stable hours in the oil and gas sector, two small daughters who appeared constantly in the record of their family's life, a house in a quiet neighborhood, a life moving forward into more of the same. In private, the picture was different in ways that were not visible on Facebook. The financial situation inside the Watts household, by 2018, had deteriorated significantly. The house on Saratoga Trail, purchased in 2016 for a price consistent with the Colorado real estate market of that period, had become a financial burden. Weld County Public Records documented that a formal notice of foreclosure had been filed against the property. The family had accumulated significant debt across multiple obligations. The mortgage was behind, credit card balances had grown, and the combined income of a petroleum equipment operator and a direct sales promoter was not keeping pace with what was going out. The specific numbers were in the public record. The gap between income and outgoing had widened to the point where the house they were living in was in formal legal jeopardy. None of this was mentioned on Shanann's Facebook. None of it appeared in the running documentation of family life. The birthday posts continued. The Thrive promotions continued. The foreclosure notice was public record, but was not part of the public image. In June of 2018, Shanann discovered she was pregnant for the third time. She and Chris had talked about wanting a son, and the positive tests were received by Shanann with the specific joy of a woman who had wanted this. and was now having it. She announced the pregnancy on Facebook, in the way she announced everything, with a photograph that was thought through and warm and designed to communicate the news with the maximum of feeling. The photograph showed Bella and Celeste, each holding a small pair of baby shoes. Their faces were bright with the news they were being given about a future sibling. The caption was simple and joyful. The response from her following was immediate and enthusiastic, in the way that pregnancy announcements from people their followers have been following for years tend to be. There was genuine investment in the outcome. She posted about the pregnancy regularly in the weeks that followed, about how she was feeling at each new week of gestation, about the girl's excitement at the prospect of a little brother, about what the name would be. She and Chris had decided together the baby would be Nico Lee Watts. He was due in January of 2019. What Shanann did not know in June of 2018, when she announced Nico's existence and began building the documented anticipation of his arrival in the family, was that her husband had in that same period entered into a relationship with another woman. Nicole Kessinger was 28 years old and worked in a professional capacity connected to the oil and gas industry in the Denver area. She and Christopher Watts had come into contact through the professional overlap of their work. What is documented clearly in the records that investigators would later obtain is that by late June of 2018, Christopher Watts and Nicole Kessinger were in regular, frequent, and intimate communication. Text messages were exchanged throughout each day, from early morning to late at night, in the volume and with the content of people conducting a relationship rather than a professional acquaintance. Phone calls ran long in the evenings. They met in person on multiple occasions across July and into August, going to dinner, spending time together in ways that required explanation to Shanann and that produced explanations which were not true. What Nicole Kessinger knew about Christopher Watts' life at the time the relationship began is based primarily on her own account to investigators, an account given cooperatively and fully in August of 2018. She knew he was married. He had not concealed that, but he had told her that the marriage was effectively over, that he and his wife were in the process of separating, that the practical logistics of ending the relationship, the house, the financial arrangements, the formal separation, were being worked through. He described himself, in the account he gave her, as a man at the beginning of a new chapter, not a man with a pregnant wife and 2 small daughters and a house in foreclosure, but a man in the process of getting free of a relationship that had run its course and building towards something different. He did not tell her about the pregnancy. Shanann had announced it publicly on Facebook in June, but Chris and Nicole were not Facebook friends in any way that would have made that announcement visible to her. He managed what she knew by managing what she was told. She was not told about Nico Lee Watts. She went through the relationship of June, July, and into August, believing she was involved with a man whose separation was in process, whose previous relationship was winding down, whose life had room in it for what they were building. Through July of 2018, while Shanann took the girls to North Carolina to spend time with her parents, a trip that extended to several weeks, Chris remained in Colorado. The stated reason was the demands of the Anadarko work schedule, which made extended time away from the sites impractical. The actual circumstances of those weeks, documented in the phone records and GPS data and Nicole Kessinger's account to investigators, were weeks in which the relationship with Nicole occupied significant portions of his time and attention. The constraints imposed by Shanann's presence were absent. He moved more freely through those weeks. The records of where he was and who he was with told a story of a man who was, functionally, conducting a separate life. Shanann in North Carolina knew the marriage was in trouble. She said so directly to people she trusted. She sent messages to the marriage counselor she and Chris had been seeing intermittently, describing his emotional withdrawal, the quality of distance when they spoke on the phone, the sense that he was not fully present in the relationship even when they were nominally in contact. She wrote to close friends about her fear that something was seriously wrong. She told her mother. She did not have a specific name for what was wrong. She had an accurate general sense of wrongness that was real, but not yet actionable because it was not specific enough to act on. She wondered, in at least one documented message, whether the issue was another woman. The wondering was accurate. The specific knowledge was not yet there. When she brought the girls back to Colorado in August, The surface of ordinary domestic life resumed. Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant. She was working her Thrive business from home, keeping up with her social media presence, managing the girls' schedules, preparing for a third child, and trying simultaneously to understand what was happening in her marriage and what might be done about it. A Thrive conference was scheduled for the weekend of August 11th and 12th in the Phoenix area of Arizona. Shanann was going. It was a professional commitment she took seriously, and she had arranged coverage for the girls while Chris worked his usual schedule. Before she left for Arizona, she and Chris had the first part of the conversation she knew they needed to have. The specific content of what was said between them in that pre-trip conversation is documented through the messages Shanann sent to others afterward, reporting what had been said. His acknowledgement that he was not sure he was in love with her anymore, reported by Shanann to the marriage counselor and to a close friend in texts recovered later, was devastating. She was 15 weeks pregnant with their planned son, the son they had chosen a name for, the son she had announced to her following on Facebook with the photograph of the girls and the baby shoes. She had just been told by her husband that he was not sure he loved her. She booked her bags and went to Arizona anyway. The Thrive conference ran across the weekend. Shanann attended sessions and worked and spent time with colleagues from the Thrive network in the way of someone who takes professional commitments seriously and does not let personal difficulty dissolve her ability to function. But the marriage was present throughout. She spoke to friends at the conference about what she was facing, about the conversation before she left, about her fear that things were considerably worse than she had wanted to believe. She spoke about it on Saturday, and she spoke about it again on Sunday, with the level of repetition that marks a worry too heavy to put down. The fear that there might be another woman came up more than once in those conversations. On Sunday evening, before she left for the airport, she had a conversation with a close friend that was direct about how frightened she was. She said she needed to talk to Chris seriously when she got home. She said she hoped they could work through whatever it was. She said she was scared. She was also, because she was the kind of mother who missed her children when she was away from them, looking forward to seeing Bella and Cece. In Frederick that evening, Christopher Watts spoke to Nicole Kessinger by phone. The call lasted a significant amount of time, documented in the phone records that investigators would later obtain and review. Nicole would later describe the call to investigators as notable. Chris had seemed distracted, she said, preoccupied with something he wasn't talking about, not fully present in the way he usually was. The following morning, after the events of that night had run their course, she received a text from him telling her he had spoken to Shanann about wanting to separate. She read it and took it at face value because she had no reason not to. Shanann's flight landed at Denver International Airport in the early hours of Monday, August 13th. A colleague from the conference drove her from the airport back to Frederick, the drive taking approximately an hour across the dark Colorado plains. The car turned into the driveway at 2825 Saratoga Trail at 1:48 in the morning. The colleague left. Shanann carried her bags inside. The house was dark. Her daughters were asleep upstairs. Her husband was there. She had been traveling for hours. She was tired and 15 weeks pregnant, and she had come home to have the hardest conversation she had been building toward for weeks. The neighbor's security camera did not capture her arrival. The camera's field of view did not fully cover the Watts driveway in a way that recorded her going inside, but it would capture, several hours later, the truck leaving. What happened inside the house between 1:48 in the morning and 5:17 when the camera first recorded Christopher Watts in his driveway making those deliberate, unhurried trips between the house and the truck is known now. It is known because the only adult alive after those hours were over eventually provided accounts of it. A false one first, under interrogation pressure, and then a more complete one, under the terms of a plea agreement that demanded the truth as the price of the death penalty being taken off the table. Shanann came inside, and they talked. It was the conversation she had been dreading and preparing for across the Arizona trip. The conversation she had told her friend at the conference she needed to have. He told her he wanted a separation. He said the marriage was over. What she said in response to that, to hearing from her husband at 2 in the morning while 15 weeks pregnant with their son, that he wanted to end the marriage, is not in the record because there were no witnesses and no recording. The conversation occurred in the house, in the dark, while the girls slept upstairs, and the neighborhood was silent, and the security camera on the neighbor's house waited, recording nothing but the empty driveway and the pre-dawn quiet. At some point in the early hours of August 13, 2018, in the bedroom of their house on Saratoga Trail, Christopher Watts strangled Shanann Watts. She was 34 years old. She was 15 weeks pregnant with Nico Lee Watts. She was wearing the clothes she had traveled home in, because she never had the chance to change them. She died in the house she had been looking forward to coming back to, the house where her daughters were asleep down the hall, and where the baby shoes were still in a drawer somewhere from the announcement photograph. Then he went to his daughters' rooms. Bella was 4 years old. Celeste was 3. They were asleep in their beds. What happened to them is stated here as the record states it, plainly and without elaboration. They died in their beds in the early hours of August 13, 2018. The medical examiner's findings established asphyxiation as the cause of death for both girls. They were 4 and 3 years old. The record holds what happened. The obligation is to state the fact plainly and to decline to go further, because going further would serve nothing and would cost something. The fact is stated. The fact is sufficient. The fact is more than sufficient. By 5:17 in the morning, the neighbor's camera recorded Christopher Watts in his driveway. He was loading things into the work truck, making multiple trips, carrying items between the house and the vehicle, moving with the deliberate, unhurried efficiency of a person completing a physical task. By 5:27, the truck pulled out of the driveway. The camera recorded it leaving. He drove northeast on roads he knew from years of the same daily commute, out through the flat Colorado farmland that extends east of Frederick and Denver toward the oil country of Weld County. He drove approximately 40 miles to the Survey 319 well site near Roggan, Colorado. The site is remote in the specific way of oil field infrastructure, not hidden, but not convenient, accessible through service roads in open country, surrounded by flat land in every direction, staffed only by the workers assigned to it on any given day. He had been driving to that site for work for 2 years. He knew it in the spatial and practical way that you know a place you have been going to every working morning. At Survey 319, Christopher Watts placed the bodies of Bella and Celeste in 2 separate crude oil storage tanks at the facility. The tanks are industrial-scale units, sealed, operating as active components of an oil and gas extraction operation. Then he dug a shallow grave in the earth near one of the tanks and placed Shanann's body in it, still in the clothes she had traveled home in, still carrying Nico Lee Watts at 15 weeks. He covered the grave. He returned to his truck. He drove back to Frederick. He had a meeting that morning. A real estate agent had been scheduled to come to the house on Saratoga Trail to discuss listing the property for sale. The meeting had been arranged in the days preceding August 13th, consistent with the narrative Christopher Watts had been constructing for Nicole Kessinger. The marriage was effectively over. The house would need to be sold. He was working through the logistics of beginning his life again. The agent arrived at the appointed time. Chris let her in. He walked her through the rooms of the house. They discussed the property's features, the current state of the Weld County real estate market, comparable sales in the area, the likely listing price and timeline. The agent conducted her analysis. She saw a house. She saw a cooperative seller discussing a reasonable transaction. She had absolutely no reason to see anything other than what was presented to her. She finished her work and left. He went back to the Anadarko worksite and resumed his day. Shanann had a prenatal appointment scheduled for that Monday morning. Her close friend Nicole Atkinson was supposed to pick her up for it. Nicole and Shanann had been friends for years, close in the specific and all-encompassing way of women who communicate constantly, whose friendship is conducted substantially through the ongoing exchange of texts and voice messages, and the continuous low-level sharing of their daily lives through whatever medium is available. Nicole expected to hear from Shanann before the appointment. She texted, nothing. She texted again, nothing. She called, voicemail. She texted a third time. She called again, nothing. This did not fit any pattern Nicole recognized. Shanann Watts existed in a state of near constant digital availability. She ran her Thrive business from her phone, maintained her social media presence from her phone, responded to messages from friends as a matter of ordinary daily habit. The silence that had settled over Shanann's phone since early Monday morning was anomalous in a way that did not resolve into any ordinary explanation. This was not someone who occasionally went quiet. This was not someone who let texts sit unanswered for hours. Shanann's phone was an extension of her social and professional functioning, and the silence was the presence of a problem, not the absence of one. Shanann also missed the prenatal appointment. She simply was not there. She did not call ahead to cancel, did not message to say she was running late, did not respond to the calls from the clinic or from Nicole. She was 15 weeks pregnant and managing her health with the attentiveness of someone who had spent years living with a serious chronic illness. The idea that she would miss a prenatal appointment without any communication was inconsistent with everything Nicole knew about her. Nicole reached out to Chris at the worksite. She texted him and told him she was worried that she had not been able to reach Shanann, that Shanann had missed the appointment. His response when it came was calm. He texted back suggesting Shanann might be resting at home, that maybe she had taken the girls somewhere, that she would reach out when she was ready. The texts were the texts of a man who was not alarmed. The texts were the texts of a man managing the information flow from multiple directions with practiced calm. Nicole Atkinson drove to 2825 Saratoga Trail. She rang the doorbell. The house was silent. She knocked and knocked. She walked around the exterior of the property, looking. She could see through the glass of the front door that the family's dog was inside, alone in the quiet house. She called the non-emergency number for the Frederick Police Department and requested a welfare check. Officer Scott Coonrod of the Frederick Police Department arrived at the Watts property in response to the call at approximately 1:40 in the afternoon on August 13th. He was in uniform and he was wearing his department-issued body camera. The camera was running. It would continue running throughout his time at the property and through his initial interaction with Christopher Watts. The resulting footage would later become one of the central documents in the investigation, not because it captured anything explicitly incriminating, but because it captured Christopher Watts navigating the first official scrutiny of his situation. And what it recorded was the navigation, the management, the specific quality of his presence in a situation that should have been producing something different. Christopher Watts was not at the house when Officer Coonrod arrived. He was reached by phone at the Anadarko worksite. He told the officer a story. Shanann had come home from Arizona in the early morning hours. They had had a conversation. It had been difficult. She had been upset. Around 5:15 in the morning, she had taken the girls and left. He had gone to work. He did not know where she had gone, he assumed. She was at a friend's somewhere or had possibly taken the girls to her parents in North Carolina. He was not particularly worried. He thought she just needed space. He left the worksite and drove back to Frederick. The body camera recorded his arrival at the house. It recorded him moving through the rooms with investigators, the specific quality of his gait and his manner and his expression as he answered questions and participated in the first official examination of a scene that he had left that morning under very different circumstances. What investigators who reviewed that footage would consistently report is the same absence that Nicole Atkinson had registered standing outside the house, ringing the unanswered doorbell. He did not look like a man whose pregnant wife and 2 small daughters had vanished without explanation in the preceding 12 hours. The fear that belongs to that situation, the specific, visceral, uncontrollable fear of not knowing where your children are, of the silence where your family should be, was not visible in the footage. What was visible was the production of appropriate responses by a person whose internal state was not generating them naturally. The performance was competent. It was not convincing. He told Officer Coonrod about the marital difficulties. He acknowledged things had not been good between them. He explained that Shanann had seemed distressed when she left, that he thought she needed time, that he expected she would reach out when she was ready. He walked investigators through the house. He answered questions in a measured, cooperative tone. He stood in the doorway at one point and spoke to a neighbor who had come to ask what was happening. He produced, moment by moment, the responses that a confused and moderately worried husband might produce in this situation. The body camera recorded all of it, neutrally, without opinion. Nicole Atkinson stood in the vicinity throughout much of this. She had known Shanann for years. She had been in this house before. She knew how Chris and Shanann interacted, how he carried himself in ordinary life. what his manner communicated when things were normal. She watched him work through the expected behaviors in this distinctly abnormal situation, and what she felt, by her own account described later to investigators and to the public, was not reassurance. It was the opposite. Something in the totality of what she was watching was wrong, and the wrongness was pervasive rather than localized in any single specific observation. He was not afraid, and he should have been afraid. Investigators left the property that evening. The case was formally opened as a missing persons investigation. The house had been walked through. Statements had been taken. The first elements of an evidence catalogue had been assembled. That evening, the inventory of what was in the house told a story. Shanann's cell phone, in the house. Her purse, in the house. Her wedding ring, in the house. This combination of absent items was not consistent with a voluntary departure. A woman who decides to leave, even in distress, even upset, even without telling her husband where she is going, does not leave without her phone. The phone is not a luxury item she can choose to leave behind. It is how she navigates. It is how she accesses her money. It is how she communicates with everyone who matters to her. It is how she runs her business. Shanann Watts without her phone was Shanann Watts unable to be Shanann Watts. Its presence in the house documented that she had not walked out of it. The purse, with her identification and her money and her cards, was equally undeniable. The wedding ring was more ambiguous. A woman leaving a marriage might leave her ring, but the phone and the purse together, in the context of two young children also unaccounted for, produced a picture that investigators were not going to treat as a voluntary departure. Through the evening of August 13th and the morning of August 14th, the investigation assembled the physical and digital record of the morning with increasing precision. The neighbor's security camera footage was obtained and reviewed carefully and repeatedly. The footage showed the work truck leaving the driveway at 5:27 in the morning of August 13th. It showed no other vehicle leaving the property at any point before or after that departure. Shanann's car remained in the garage, documented in place. If she had taken the girls somewhere by car, she had done so without using the car that was in the garage. There was no record of a rideshare arriving, no record of a taxi, no footage of anyone leaving the property on foot with two children at any point that morning. The only documented departure from 2825 Saratoga Trail on the morning of August 13th was the work truck driven by Christopher Watts at 5:27 in the morning. The GPS records from his Anadarko work vehicle were obtained through a formal request to the company. The data placed his truck at the Survey 319 well site in Weld County on the morning of August 13th, consistent with his stated work route, but also, investigators were noting, consistent with a specific destination that was relevant for reasons that were becoming clearer as the timeline assembled itself. Phone records were obtained through the carriers. The full record of all calls and texts sent and received by both Christopher Watts and Shanann Watts across the periods surrounding August 12th and 13th was being assembled and reviewed. What those records showed, among much else, was the volume and the nature of the communications between Chris and Nicole Kessinger across the preceding weeks. A record that documented a relationship being conducted in parallel with his marriage, sustained across hundreds of daily text messages and regular phone calls, built on a premise about Chris's life that was constructed rather than real. The text he had sent to Nicole on the morning of August 13th, after the truck had left the driveway, was in the record. He had texted her after leaving. He had told her he had spoken to Shanann about wanting to separate. The timestamp placed that text in the morning of the day on which, by the account he was giving the police, his wife had spontaneously taken the children and left. On the morning of Tuesday, August 14th, Katie Souza, a reporter from Denver 7, arrived at 2825 Saratoga Trail. Christopher Watts had agreed to speak to the media about the disappearance of his family. He came to the front door. The cameras were pointed at him. The recording equipment was running. This footage is the document in the case that most people who follow true crime know. It occupies a specific position in the public record of the case that is different from the other documents, because of what it captures and because of what was happening on the other side of it. What he already knew about his family when he stood in that doorway and looked at the camera and spoke. It has been watched, tens of millions of times. It has been analyzed and reanalyzed from every angle by journalists and investigators and criminologists and ordinary people who watched it and could not fully name what they were responding to, but could not stop responding to it. He stands in the doorway of the house in a grey t-shirt. The morning light is flat and grey-white. He looks at the camera. His voice is steady and measured and level. He says he just wants his family to come back. He mentions the pregnancy, the baby Nico. He says Bella's name. He says Cece's name. He says the house feels empty without them, and he needs them home. He addresses Shanann directly, looking into the lens, and asks her if she is watching to please reach out and let him know they are safe. He says nothing bad will happen if she comes home. He says he loves her, and he loves the girls. Every word is the correct word. The organization of the statement is right. It hits every note the situation calls for, and hits them in the right order. He is saying exactly what a man in his situation should say, and none of it is landing. His eyes don't carry the weight of what he is describing. His hands are completely still at his sides, hanging there with the specific stillness of a person who is not being moved by the emotional content of their own words, because those words are not connected to anything real inside them. His voice is level in a way that genuine fear and grief and love in extremis does not produce levelness. Genuine distress is not controlled like that. You can hear controlled. This is something else. Something that is not feeling the words as they are being said. The footage went live on Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon it was everywhere, on every platform that could embed a video, in every comment section and message board and private group where people who pay attention to cases like this were gathering to process what they were watching. The response was consistent across every demographic and geography. He did it. He knows where they are. Something is wrong with him. The phrasing differed. The observation was the same. The investigators were not working from comment sections. They were working from records, and the records were by Tuesday no longer consistent with any interpretation other than the one they were being built around. On the afternoon of August 14th, Shanann's parents arrived in Colorado from North Carolina. Frank and Sandy Rusek had moved as soon as the gravity of the situation became clear to them. They were in Frederick, talking to investigators, present while the case was still described publicly as a missing persons investigation. Sandy Rusek, who had been close to her granddaughters in the specific way of grandmothers who are genuinely involved, and not merely titular, was in a law enforcement building while the investigation that was going to answer the worst questions her life had ever produced was still working through its early stages. The Colorado Bureau of Investigation had senior agents on the case. The FBI was involved. The Weld County Sheriff's Office was contributing resources. The scale of what was being brought to bear reflected what the evidence was pointing toward. On the morning of August 15th, investigators contacted Christopher Watts and asked him to come to the Frederick Police Department voluntarily for an interview. He agreed. He arrived that afternoon. Special Agent Tammy Lee and Agent Graham Coda of the Colorado Bureau of Investigation were there to receive him. The room was equipped with recording technology. The recording equipment was running from the moment he entered. Agent Tammy Lee is, in the recordings of what followed that became part of the public record, a study in calibrated professional pressure. She does not raise her voice at any point in the conversation. She makes no explicit threats and no explicit accusations through the early portions of the interview. She is calm in the way of a person who knows considerably more than the person sitting across from them and is completely comfortable holding that knowledge while the conversation develops at the pace it needs to develop. She is patient. She follows threads carefully. She gives the subject space and then closes it. She has clearly done this before and she knows what she is doing. He told his story again. The same story, the same structure, the same sequence of events. Shanann came home from Arizona in the early morning hours. They had a difficult conversation. She had been upset. Around 5:15, she had taken the girls and left. He had gone to work. He didn't know where she had gone. The investigators listened without challenging him. They asked clarifying questions that established the specific details of the account in precise form on the recording. They got the version he was telling onto the record with all its specifics, the times, the sequence, the particular claims about what had happened and when, because the specificity of a false account is the material you use to demonstrate its falseness. You need the account to be specific before you can show specifically where it fails. Before bringing out the contradictions, the investigators offered Christopher Watts a polygraph examination. He agreed without significant hesitation. The polygraph is not admissible as evidence in Colorado courts. Its results cannot be shown to a jury as proof of deception. What it does, in the architecture of an interrogation, is serve as a formal mechanism. The examination generates a documented result. The examiner reviews it. The examiner then returns to the subject and tells them, face to face, while the recording continues, that the results indicate deception. That moment, the moment of formal confrontation, the moment the subject is told by an official examiner that the test shows they have not been truthful, is the hinge point around which the post-polygraph interrogation operates. The polygraph's value in an interrogation is not evidentiary. It is procedural. It creates a documented confrontation that changes the terrain of the conversation. Christopher Watts sat through the polygraph. He answered the questions put to him. The equipment recorded its measurements. The examiner left the room, reviewed the result, and returned to tell Christopher Watts that the examination indicated he had been deceptive. Agents Lee and Coda came back into the room. What followed is one of the most important recorded conversations in the case's documented record. Agent Lee worked steadily through the space she had created. She talked about his daughters. She named them specifically, Bella and Cece, in the way of a person who is talking about people rather than categories. She talked about what it means to be a father. She talked about the family outside this building right now. Frank and Sandy Arzusek, who had flown from North Carolina, who had been sitting in this building and in hotels and in a law enforcement facility for 2 days now, who needed answers in the way that only families in this situation need answers, which is urgently and completely. She talked about the difference between a man who has done something terrible and a man who, on top of that terrible thing, refuses to give the people who love those victims the basic human dignity of knowing what happened. She held those two things clearly distinct from each other. She gave him a door, and she described what was on the other side of it, and she kept the door open. She did not stop. The pressure she applied was patient and methodical and institutional, and it was not going to relent. The pressure of 2 days of contradictory evidence, of a polygraph result, of GPS data and phone records and a neighbor's security camera, of a wife's phone and purse and ring sitting in a house from which the wife had supposedly driven away, all of that accumulated pressure was present in the room, being applied in the measured and deliberate way of someone who knows the pressure is going to work, because the evidence is already there. At a specific documented point in the afternoon of August 15, 2018, the account changed. He told investigators a new version. He said that, on the morning of August 13th, while he was downstairs before going to work, he had looked at the baby monitor that provided a live video feed of the girls' room. He said he had seen Shanann doing something to one of the girls on that monitor. He said he had gone upstairs in response. He said a confrontation had occurred between him and Shanann in the bedroom. He said he had put his hands around her neck. He said he had strangled her. He said that when it was over and he went to check on the girls, they were already dead. He said Shanann had already killed them before he reached them. This is the first version of the confession. It is in the recorded interrogation. It is what Christopher Watts told investigators on the afternoon of August 15, 2018, and its construction is not subtle. It acknowledges his direct role in Shanann's death while assigning responsibility for the children's deaths to Shanann herself. He killed his wife, this version says, as a reaction to watching her kill his children. The children were gone before he got there. He was the reactor, not the actor. He also told investigators, in that same session, where the bodies were. He said they were at his work site, the Survey 319 Anadarko well site near Roggan, Weld County, Colorado, 40 miles northeast of where they were sitting. Investigators moved with urgency. Law enforcement personnel drove northeast across the flat Colorado landscape toward the oil field. The Survey 319 site is remote in the way that industrial infrastructure in unpopulated country is remote, accessible by service roads, surrounded by open land, staffed only by assigned workers, not somewhere a member of the public would go. Christopher Watts was placed under arrest at the Frederick Police Department on the afternoon of August 15, 2018. He was taken into custody and transported to the Weld County Jail in Greeley. He was held without bond while the formal charges were being assembled. At the Survey 319 site, investigators found what he had told them they would find. Shanann Watts's body was in a shallow grave near one of the oil storage tanks. She was in the clothes she had traveled home from Phoenix in. She was 34 years old. She was 15 weeks pregnant with Nico Lee Watts. The grave was not deep. It had been dug quickly by a single person before the drive back to Frederick and the meeting with the real estate agent. The bodies of Bella and Celeste Watts were recovered from inside two of the crude oil storage tanks at the facility. They had been placed there separately. Bella was 4 years old. Celeste was 3 years old. Their recovery required investigators working with equipment adequate to the conditions of an active industrial oil storage facility. The Weld County Medical Examiner established the causes of death: Shanann Watts, strangulation; Bella and Celeste Watts, asphyxiation; manner of death for all three, homicide. Nico Lee Watts, 15 weeks along, was addressed under Colorado's Unborn Victims of Violence Act as a fourth victim for purposes of criminal charges. The charges were filed by Weld County District Attorney Michael Rourke. First-degree murder after deliberation for the deaths of Bella and Celeste. First-degree murder with extreme indifference for the death of Shanann. 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy. The first-degree murder charges for the deaths of the children placed Christopher Watts within Colorado's capital sentencing eligibility. The district attorney's office announced it was seeking the death penalty. The news of the arrest broke on the afternoon of August 15th. The case had been national news since the doorstep footage was broadcast Tuesday morning. When the arrest update moved across every news outlet, husband charged with killing pregnant wife and daughters, the response was immediate and total. The doorstep footage was replayed in its new context. The timeline was published and republished. The specific fact of the timing, that he had made those trips to the real estate agent and back to work, and then stood on the doorstep with the cameras on him on Tuesday morning, while his family had already been at the survey site since Monday, produced the specific horror that made the case different in kind from other domestic murders. It was not just what had been done, it was the footage of him doing the interview, the documented fact of what he already knew when he stood in that doorway, the camera running, and him in his grey t-shirt asking his family to come home. The investigation expanded after the arrest into every available record. Every communication Christopher Watts had sent or received across the preceding months was reviewed. The Nicole Kessinger text records, the financial documents showing the foreclosure proceedings, the GPS records across the period of the affair, the social media archive Shanann had built across years of Facebook posts and videos. All of it was assembled into the case file. Nicole Kessinger cooperated fully with the investigation, giving multiple extended interviews. The investigation found nothing to suggest she had known what he was planning or had been involved in what he had done. She had believed the account he gave her of his life. She was not charged with any crime. Her account of discovering the full reality of what she had been party to, discovering the pregnancy she had not been told about, discovering what had happened on August 13th, is documented in her subsequent cooperation with investigators and in the single media interview she gave. Through the fall of 2018, the case moved toward resolution. The death penalty was formally on the table. The evidence against Christopher Watts was comprehensive and interconnected, and did not leave significant room for a contested factual defense at trial. The Weld County District Attorney's Office entered into plea negotiations with the defense. The agreement had 2 central terms. Christopher Watts would plead guilty to all charges. The death penalty would be removed. In exchange, he would provide investigators with a full and accurate account of what had happened in the early hours of August 13th. Not the baby monitor story, the true account. The second condition was not an afterthought. The first confession was false, and the investigators knew it. The medical examiner's findings were not consistent with the baby monitor story. The forensic evidence was not consistent with it. The families needed the truth. The district attorney's office was not prepared to negotiate the death penalty away for anything less. On November 6, 2018, Christopher Lee Watts appeared before Judge Marcelo Kopkow in the Weld County District Court in Greeley, Colorado. and entered guilty pleas to all charges. 2 counts of first-degree murder after deliberation for the deaths of Bella and Celeste. 1 count of first-degree murder with extreme indifference for the death of Shanann. 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy. He said guilty in a courtroom where Frank and Sandy Rusek and Frankie Rusek were present and watching. Prior to sentencing, investigators conducted the session required under the plea agreement. They sat with Christopher Watts, and he provided the account he had agreed to provide. He said he had strangled Shanann in their bedroom. He said the baby monitor story was a fabrication invented during the interrogation under pressure as a mechanism for shifting the responsibility for the children's deaths onto their mother. He said he had gone to his daughter's rooms himself. He said they were asleep. He said what he did. The full account is in the case record. It contradicts the first version. It is the version consistent with the medical examiner's findings, with the forensic evidence, with the full documented timeline of August 13th. It is the version the families were given. The sentencing hearing was held on November 19, 2018. What the Rusacek family placed into the formal record of those proceedings is among the most important documentation the case produced. Sandy Rusek addressed the court. The transcript is public. She spoke with a specific kind of composure. Not detachment, not the absence of feeling, but the deliberate containing of feeling in order to say what needed to be said before the feeling could be allowed to continue. She was a grandmother who had held Bella and Cece, who had known them in the particular and irreplaceable way of grandmothers who are close to their grandchildren, who had watched Shanann grow from a child in Aberdeen into a mother and a businesswoman and a woman of genuine vitality. She told Christopher Watts, who could not go anywhere and had to receive it, what he had taken. She told him the names of what he had taken. She told him the specific qualities of who those people were and what their lives had meant and what it meant that they were gone. She told him he would live with what he had done. She told him the family would too, in a different way. Frankie Rusek spoke. He was Shanann's brother. He had grown up with her. He had known Bella and Cece as an uncle who was part of their lives, not a peripheral figure. He stood before Judge Kopko and he said directly, without diplomatic cushioning, what he thought about the man in front of him and what that man had done. The statement is blunt and specific, and it is in the record. It belongs to the record. Christopher Watts spoke briefly. He said he was sorry. He said he did not know what was wrong with him. He said his family had not deserved what he had done. The courtroom was not the venue where anyone present was going to assess the sincerity of his remorse. Judge Kopko sentenced him 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for the 3 murder counts. Additional consecutive sentences for the remaining charges. Consecutive, not concurrent, because there were 3 separate people and the sentencing was not going to consolidate them. Shanann and Bella and Celeste were 3 individuals. They would be 3 sentences. He would not be paroled. He would not be released. He would die in a correctional facility. In the months following sentencing, he was transferred to the Dodge Correctional Institution in Dodge City, Wisconsin, partly in response to documented concerns about his safety in Colorado facilities, where his crimes were well known among the population. From there, he has continued to produce records, letters, interviews, psychological assessments, additional and contradictory accounts of his state of mind and his motivations. These subsequent communications have not been consistent with each other or with the account given under the plea agreement. They constitute a continuation of the pattern visible from the first interrogation. A man whose self-account does not stabilize, who produces new versions of himself and his history under whatever audience is available. In 2020, Netflix released the documentary American Murder: The Family Next Door, directed by Jenny Popplewell. The film was built entirely from existing records rather than dramatization or reconstruction. Shanann's Facebook videos, the body camera footage, the doorstep interview, the interrogation recordings, text messages on screen. The film assembled what existed and let it run in sequence. It was watched by tens of millions of people within weeks of its release. The response to Shanann's own footage, the videos she made of herself alive, talking to her camera, filming her daughters, announcing Nico's existence, being funny and real and present, in the ordinary forward-moving way of a person who believes they are recording the present in order to remember it later, was profound and lasting. People described being unprepared for what it felt like to watch a woman document her life with such warmth and such ordinariness, knowing what she did not know. Shanann Watts left behind an archive of herself that most victims of violent crime do not leave behind. Hours of video, thousands of posts, a detailed running record of who she was as a person, built over years for ordinary reasons, that survived what happened to her and remains accessible. The woman in those videos, her voice, her humor, her way of being present, the specific quality of her attention to the people she loved, is there in the footage, and it is real, and it is not going anywhere. The public response to this case has been organized partly around the horror of the specific contrast between the documented life and the documented death, and partly around the ongoing conversation about intimate partner violence and the specific risk factors that the case made unusually legible: the pregnancy, the affair, the financial pressure, the period of impending separation. All of those factors are documented in the research literature on conditions associated with the most extreme outcomes of intimate partner violence. The completeness of the case record made them visible in a way that cases with thinner documentation cannot match. There is one final element, and it was there from the very beginning, before any investigation, before any arrest, before anything except a camera mounted on a neighbor's house to watch for package theft. 5:17 in the morning, August 13th, 2018. Frederick, Colorado. The Saratoga Trail neighborhood is asleep. The light is the flat pale gray of a Colorado summer before sunrise. A security camera is running, as it runs every morning, recording whatever is in its field of view. A man comes out of the house next door. He makes trips between the house and his work truck, carrying things, moving with the deliberate, unhurried efficiency of a person working through a task. By 5:27, the truck pulls out of the driveway. The camera records it going. In the frame of that camera, at that moment, it is an unremarkable Monday morning. A man going to work. There is nothing to distinguish this from any other Monday on which the same man has made the same drive to the same oil field sites. The camera does not know what is different about this morning. The camera does not know anything. It records what it records. Shanann Watts would have turned 35 on January 10th, 2019. Bella Marie Watts would have turned 5 on December 17th, 2018. Celeste Catherine Watts would have turned 4 on July 17th, 2019. Nico Lee Watts was due in January of 2019. He was never born. These are the facts. The neighbor's camera and Officer Coonrod's body camera and the news camera on the morning of August 14th, and the interrogation recording system and the GPS tracker and the phone records and the polygraph equipment and the medical examiner's instruments, and the Weld County courtroom recording system. All of it ran without opinion, without agenda, without any interest in the outcome. All of it recorded what was in front of it, and it kept the record. The record shows a truck leaving a driveway at 5:27 in the morning of August 13th, 2018. The record shows a man on a doorstep the following morning, looking into a camera, asking his family to come home. The record shows everything that was on the other side of those two images, everything that sat between them and beneath them and made them what they were. It holds all of it. It always will. The investigation that assembled around the Watts case in the days following the arrest produced a documentary record of extraordinary breadth and density. Investigators from multiple agencies worked in parallel, each generating their own stream of documented findings that fed into the central case file being constructed under the supervision of Weld County District Attorney Michael Rourke and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. The resulting case file would eventually run to tens of thousands of pages. Interviews, forensic reports, GPS records, phone records, financial documents, social media archive reviews, real estate records, Anadarko employment records, and the complete record of 2 interrogation sessions conducted over 2 days with the man who had been sitting on the other side of all of it. The forensic examination of the house at 2825 Saratoga Trail produced findings that were consistent with the account Christopher Watts would eventually provide, under the terms of his plea agreement. The bed sheets from the master bedroom, examined by the Colorado Bureau of Investigation's forensic laboratories, produced findings. The girls' rooms were examined, physical evidence from the house was catalogued, packaged, and submitted for laboratory analysis. The forensic record that was built from the interior of the Watts home in the days following the arrest constituted one of the evidentiary pillars of the case, and its findings were not consistent with the first version of the confession, with the baby monitor story, with the account in which Shanann had already harmed the girls before Chris reached them. The evidence from the house pointed in a different direction, and that direction was consistent with the account that Christopher Watts would eventually be required to provide. The real estate agent who had been inside the house on the morning of August 13th gave her full account to investigators. She had arrived for the scheduled consultation about listing the property for sale. She had been let in by Christopher Watts, who had been at the house for that meeting. She had been shown the rooms. They had talked about the market. She had done her analysis. She described the atmosphere of the meeting as entirely ordinary, the conversation as entirely professional, the man she was speaking with as cooperative and engaged in the discussion about the property. She had seen nothing that suggested anything was wrong. She had had no reason to look for anything being wrong. The house was a house. The seller was a seller discussing a property. She left when the meeting concluded and drove away. This account, the real estate agent inside the house, discussing listing it for sale, with Chris walking her through the rooms on the morning of August 13th, was one of the elements of the case that produced the most significant public response when it became known. It documented that Christopher Watts had not, after the events of the early morning hours, gone into a state of paralysis or disorientation, or any other condition that would have prevented him from conducting ordinary business. He had gone back to the house. He had received a professional visitor. He had walked through rooms. He had discussed market conditions. He had talked about a timeline for listing. He had, in every observable particular, functioned as a person who was managing his life and moving it in the direction he had decided he wanted it to go, undeterred by what had happened in those rooms before the meeting began. The GPS data from the Anadarko work vehicle was one of the most unambiguous pieces of evidence in the case. The truck was equipped with location tracking technology standard for fleet vehicles in the oil and gas industry, where remote work sites require that employers be able to locate equipment and personnel for safety and operational purposes. The GPS record for August 13th showed the truck leaving Frederick in the early morning, traveling northeast on a route consistent with the standard commute to the Survey 319 well site, arriving at the site, remaining there for a period consistent with the activities that would later be documented in the confession, and then returning to Frederick. The record was precise, time-stamped, and entirely inconsistent with the account Chris had provided to Officer Coonrod. The account in which Shanann had taken the girls and left at 5:15, and he had simply gone to work. The cell phone records were equally precise and equally inconsistent with the story being told. Location data from Chris's phone showed the same movements documented by the GPS, northeast to the survey site, back to Frederick, to the house, to the Anadarko office, back to the house again as the afternoon unfolded. The text message records showed the communications with Nicole Kessinger in their full detail. The early message on the morning of August 13th, telling her he had spoken to Shanann about separating, the continued exchange through the day, the management of a secondary narrative running parallel to the conversation he was simultaneously having with Officer Coonrod and with Nicole Atkinson, and with the investigators, who would arrive with increasing seriousness through the afternoon. The full record of the Nicole Kessinger relationship, assembled from the recovered text messages and phone logs, and from Nicole's own cooperation with the investigation, told the story of the affair in its complete form. The relationship had begun in late June. The texts between them, across June, July, and into August, ran to hundreds of messages, in the volume and the register of a relationship that was absorbing significant emotional and practical energy. What Nicole Kessinger told investigators about the relationship, about what she had been told about his life and his marriage, about what she had believed, about the specific conversations they had had about his plans for the future, was documented in multiple extended interview sessions. She was consistent across those sessions. She described a man who had told her a convincing account of a marriage that was ending and a life that was clearing space for something new. She described herself as a person who had had no reason to disbelieve that account because she had been given no access to any information that contradicted it. When the full picture reached her, when the news broke on August 15th, and the pregnancy and the children and the bodies at the oilfield site became part of the public record, the account she gave of experiencing that revelation is documented in her subsequent cooperation and in the single media interview she ultimately gave. Investigators also examined the full financial picture of the Watts household in detail. The foreclosure proceedings against the property on Saratoga Trail were documented in Weld County public records going back to the filing of the initial notice. The specific amounts involved, the number of months the mortgage had been in arrears, the total accumulated debt across all obligations. This information was reviewed and assembled by investigators as potential background to understanding the situation Christopher Watts had been in as of August of 2018. The financial picture was serious. The house was in real danger of being lost through the foreclosure process. The combination of financial pressure, marital breakdown, an affair being actively conducted, and a pregnancy that the affair partner had not been told about represented a situation that was, by August of 2018, under whatever lens you chose to examine it, already at the edge of breaking. The Weld County medical examiner's work in the days following the recovery of the bodies produced a forensic record that was central to the case's evidentiary structure. The examination of Shanann Watts established strangulation as the cause of death, consistent with the account that would eventually be given under the plea agreement. The examination of Bella and Celeste established asphyxiation as the cause of death for both girls. The examinations also provided information about the timing of death, about the circumstances under which it had occurred, and about the consistency or inconsistency of those findings with the various accounts offered by Christopher Watts at different points in the legal process. The medical examiner's findings were not consistent with the baby monitor story. They were consistent with the true account. The forensic record was another thread in the web of documentation that made the true account inescapable. Shanann's parents, Frank and Sandy Arzuchek, had been in Colorado since the afternoon of August 14th. They had been present through the arrest and the formal filing of charges and the first days of a legal process that would take 3 months to reach its first resolution and much longer than that to reach anything approaching the kind of endpoint that grief can move toward. Sandy Arzuchek spoke publicly in the period following the arrest, in the limited way that is possible for a family in the acute phase of this kind of loss, carefully, through representatives and attorneys, managing the boundary between the private devastation and the public case that was simultaneously developing. Frank Arzuchek was more publicly reserved in those early months, present for everything, but not yet having produced the formal public statement that would come at the sentencing. Both of them were doing what families do in these situations, getting through the days. Frankie Arzuchek, Shanann's brother, spoke publicly in the days following the arrest. He spoke about his sister. He spoke about Bella and Cece. The statements he gave were full of the specific quality of grief that belongs to siblings, not the grief of a spouse or a parent, which has its own particular shape, but the grief of someone who has known the person their whole life, for whom the loss is not the loss of someone they came to love as an adult, but someone whose existence has been continuous with their own existence since childhood. He had known Shanann since she was born. He had grown up with her in the house on Saratoga Trail in Aberdeen. He had watched her become an adult and a mother and a businesswoman and a person of genuine vitality and purpose. And then he had driven to Colorado to sit in law enforcement buildings while the investigation confirmed what he already knew was true. The plea negotiations that took place through October of 2018 involved extended discussions between the defense and the district attorney's office. The death penalty was the central subject of those negotiations, as it was always going to be. Colorado's capital statute was applicable. The charges supported it. The district attorney's office had announced it was being sought. The defense position was that the full cooperation of their client, including a true account of what had happened and the already documented cooperation in locating the bodies, should weigh against the death penalty as a proportionate response. The negotiation proceeded through those weeks, while the case was simultaneously being prepared for a trial that, absent an agreement, would require the Arzuchek family to sit through a lengthy contested proceeding in which the details of Shanann and Bella and Celeste's deaths would be litigated in public. The agreement that was ultimately reached removed the death penalty from the case in exchange for the guilty pleas and the true account. The district attorney's office, in announcing the agreement, was direct about the reasoning. The death penalty was being set aside to spare the families a trial, to provide them with answers rather than prolonged uncertainty, and because the plea agreement's requirement of a full and accurate account served the interests of justice in a different way than the death penalty would have. The document that produced the true account, the session in which Christopher Watts told investigators what had actually happened in the early hours of August 13th, correcting the false baby monitor story he had offered in the interrogation, was the direct result of that negotiation and the condition that had to be satisfied before the agreement could be finalized. The day of the sentencing, November 19, 2018, was a public event in the Weld County District Court in Greeley, in the sense that all sentencing hearings are public events, open to attendance, documented in the formal record of the proceedings, available to be observed by members of the public and the press. The Rusaka family was present in the courtroom. Other people who had known Shanann and the girls were present. Christopher Watts was brought in from the jail. Judge Kopkow presided. The proceedings began. The formal legal business of the sentencing, the confirmation of the plea, the reading of the charges, the presentation of the agreed sentences, was the structural frame around which the human content of the day organized itself. The human content was the family statements. Sandy Rusacek stood at the podium, or the microphone, or wherever the speaker stands in a Colorado district courtroom, and she addressed the judge and the room and the man at the defense table. The transcript documents what she said. She spoke for a period long enough to cover what needed to be covered, and she covered it with the specific precision of a woman who had been thinking about what she needed to say for 3 months and who was not going to leave anything important out. She spoke about each person who had been killed, named individually, described in their specific qualities. She spoke about what their lives had meant. She spoke about what their absence meant. She told Christopher Watts, who was sitting within her sightline and who had to receive everything she said, that he would live with what he had done. She told him they would all live with it in different ways. What happened in the days and weeks and months and years after that sentencing is also part of the record, though in a different register. The house at 2825 Saratoga Trail went through the foreclosure process and was eventually sold and changed hands. It sits in the Saratoga Trail neighborhood of Frederick, Colorado, externally unremarkable, indistinguishable from the houses on either side of it. The neighbor whose security camera had recorded the truck leaving at 5:27 on the morning of August 13th has since moved, or stayed, or done whatever people do after their property becomes evidence in a murder case. The Saratoga Trail neighborhood is still there. Frederick, Colorado is still there. The legal record of the case is still there. The case file is in the Weld County court system, accessible through the standard public records mechanisms of the Colorado courts. The interrogation recordings are in the file. The body camera footage is in the file. The GPS records and the phone records and the forensic reports and the medical examiner's findings and the plea agreement and the sentencing transcript are all in the file. The neighbor's security camera footage, the time-stamped recording of the truck in the driveway, making those trips, leaving at 5:27, is in the file. Shanann's Facebook videos are not in the case file. They are on the internet, accessible to anyone who looks for them. Part of the permanent archive of a woman who documented her life extensively and whose documentation outlasted her. The videos she made in the weeks before August 13th, talking to her camera about the pregnancy, about the Thrive business, about the ordinary texture of her days, are accessible, in the same way that anything posted to a major social media platform in 2018 is accessible. Broadly, permanently, without any gate to pass through. The woman in those videos is alive in the way that footage makes people alive. Her voice is her voice. Her laugh is her laugh. Her way of being present with the camera, the specific and recognizable quality of her attention, and her warmth, is not archived or reconstructed. It is her. It is in the footage. The footage is still there. The record held before anyone knew to look at it. The record holds now. It will hold in whatever comes next. The documentary American Murder: The Family Next Door, released on Netflix in September of 2020, introduced the case to an audience far larger than the one that had followed it in real time through the news cycle of August 2018. Its impact on the cultural understanding of the case was substantial and specific in ways that are worth examining carefully, because the documentary's construction was itself a statement about the case and about how the case could and could not responsibly be told. Jenny Popplewell, the director, made the central formal decision that defined the film. She would not dramatize. She would not cast actors to play Shanann or Chris or the investigators. She would not write dialogue to fill in the spaces between the documented records. She would not ask the audience to accept a reconstruction, however faithful, in place of what actually existed. What existed, she decided, was enough, more than enough. The case had generated, through the normal operations of modern life in a surveillance society, the neighbor's camera, the body camera on the police officer's uniform, the news crew's equipment, the interrogation room's recording system, and above all, the thousands of hours of self-documentation that Shanann had produced on Facebook and Instagram, a complete enough record to tell the story without fabrication. The job was to assemble what existed and let it run. This decision, which might have seemed like a formal constraint, turned out to be the source of the film's power. The footage of Shanann alive is not a reconstruction, it is her. When the film presents the video of Shanann announcing the pregnancy with the baby shoes photograph, the viewer is not watching an actor simulate Shanann Watts' happiness. They are watching Shanann Watts be happy. When the film presents the security camera footage of the truck leaving at 5:27, the viewer is not watching a dramatic recreation of a documented event. They are watching the documented event. The gap between the footage of Shanann alive and the footage of the investigation is not created by the film. It is created by what happened between them. The documentary's achievement is largely the achievement of standing out of the way and letting that gap be seen. The response to the film when it was released was significant enough to generate sustained coverage in media outlets that track streaming performance and cultural impact. It was watched by tens of millions of households in the weeks following its release, making it one of the most viewed documentary films on the platform to that point. The discussion it generated was extensive and multidimensional, covering the case's specific facts, the questions it raised about intimate partner violence, and its warning signs. The experience of watching Shanann's footage in the context of knowing what happened to her, and the formal questions about how true crime documentary filmmaking can and cannot responsibly proceed. The response to the film also generated a specific conversation about what it is like to watch a person's life and not know, as they could not know, what was coming. Viewers described sitting with Shanann's videos from June and July of 2018, the videos in which she is clearly happy about the pregnancy, clearly absorbed in her business, clearly loving her daughters, clearly engaged with the ordinary forward-moving project of building a life, and feeling the weight of what she was carrying forward into. She was carrying forward into August 13th. She was carrying Nico forward into August 13th. She was carrying Bella and Cece forward into the early morning hours of August 13th in the house on Saratoga Trail, where the truck would leave at 5:27 and the neighbor's camera would record it going. The documentary did not answer the question of how this happens. It did not attempt to. It presented the record. The record does not answer that question either, not fully, because the record is what happened, documented, and the internal mechanism of what produces a person who does this, who kills his pregnant wife and his daughters, and then meets with a real estate agent, and then stands on the doorstep and asks them to come home, is not fully visible in any record, including the psychological assessments that have been conducted since. Christopher Watts has told interviewers and investigators different things about his own internal experience. None of those accounts has been consistent with the others. The internal record, if there is one, has not been made available in any form that holds. What is held, and what will continue to be held, is the external record, the neighbor's camera, the body camera footage, the news footage from the morning of August 14th, the interrogation recordings, the GPS data, the phone records, the medical examiner's findings, the plea, the sentencing, the statements from Sandy Arzusek and Frankie Ruzicek in the Weld County District Court on November 19, 2018, which are in the formal record of those proceedings, and which document, in the most human and irreducible way possible, what was taken, and from whom, and what the taking cost. And Shanann's videos, still there, still accessible. The woman in them, still alive in the way that footage makes people alive, talking to a camera about her business and her daughters and the baby she was expecting in January of 2019, who was going to be called Nico Lee Watts and who never arrived. The cameras ran through all of it. The neighbor's security camera and the body camera and the news camera and the interrogation recording system and the Facebook live sessions and the Instagram posts, all of them ran without opinion or agenda, recording what was in front of them, indifferent to the weight of what they were capturing. They held the record. The record held. It still does. There is an element of the public record of this case that sits in a different category from all the other documents. The personal messages Shanann sent to people she trusted in the weeks before August 13th. They were not published. They were not intended to be seen by anyone beyond their recipients. They were the messages a person sends when they are trying to understand something that is happening to them and need the response of someone who knows them well. When investigators recovered them through the phone records and the accounts of the people who received them, they became part of the case file. They eventually became part of the public record. What those messages document is a woman in the process of identifying, slowly and with increasing clarity, that something was seriously wrong in her marriage. She is not wrong in those messages. Her instincts are accurate. She writes to the marriage counselor about Chris's emotional withdrawal and the quality of distance in their conversations, and she is describing something real. She writes to a friend about her fear that another woman might be involved, and she is describing something real. She does not know the specific facts of what is real, but the general sense of wrongness she is trying to name is not a misreading. She is reading the situation accurately, without having access to the specific information that would make the accurate reading fully specific. There is a quality to reading those messages in the context of knowing what was coming that is different from the experience of reading almost any other document the case produced. They are the record of a person trying to understand a situation they do not yet fully understand, reaching out to people they trust, asking questions they do not yet have answers to, working through the problem with the tools available. They are entirely ordinary in this way. Everyone sends messages like this. Everyone has been in a situation where something was wrong and they were trying to work out what it was, and they reached out to people they trusted to help them work it out. The messages are completely ordinary and they are completely devastating because of what was happening on the other side of them and because of where they were going. She sent the last of those messages on the day before she flew home from Phoenix. She told a friend she was scared about what she was going to find when she got back. She said she and Chris needed to have a real conversation. She said she hoped they could work through it. She was heading to the airport for her flight back to Denver, back to Frederick, back to the house on Saratoga Trail, back to the conversation she had been dreading and preparing for and was now ready to have. The neighbor's camera was there when she came home. It was there when the truck left at 5:27. It did not know what it was recording. It did not need to know. The record does not require understanding to hold. It requires only the running of the camera, the time-stamping of the footage, the keeping of what it captured against the moment when someone would know to look. Someone looked. The record was there.